Welcome back to another reading of SCP Resurrection, Old Foes Hub, dear researchers. Today we'll be continuing on with scenes from a comprehensive clusterfuck by the Spider Queen, Notgull, the Pighead, and Harry Blank. Now without further ado, let's begin. Scenes from a comprehensive clusterfuck. Dr. Dan made a sound somewhere between a squeal and a growl, his eyes scrunched tight. Moon Champion's moving west, Furu reported. He is still riding 058. Don't talk to me about Moon Champion right now. When Dan opened his eyes, they were bloodshot. Talk about something sane! Researcher Calvin was at his wit's end. The traffic on the way to the site was enough to send the most patient driver over the edge. Troop trucks, tanks, even some weird mechanical suit things he didn't recognize. And what was with the new security perimeter? Come on, come on, come on! The man at the checkpoint had almost seemed amused by his plight. I'm late for work. There was some sort of MTF operation going on in the site grounds. It was another 5 minutes before he finally reached the yellow-striped bar at the parking garage. Pass. Something was off about the attendant, but Calvin had never paid them much attention before. Was the uniform different? No Foundation insignia. It's right here! Calvin pointed to the inconspicuous stupid college people sticker just above the inspection decal. You need a valid pass to park here, the attendant remarked, glancing at the sticker. Are you saying mine's invalid? Correct. The man squinted at him. Which outfit are you with? It's literally the newest pass as of last week. Calvin's cheeks flushed. He opened the glove compartment and took out his parking contract. What about this? He pointed to it as he read aloud. 08-16-2020 to 01-15-2021. The attendant's eyes widened. Oh, you're one of the... He looked unpleasantly surprised. Well, this is definitely invalid then. What did they say at the checkpoint? They laughed and waved me through. The look of unpleasant surprise became a look of rueful irritation. Joke's on me, I guess. Well, my fella, I paid $60 for this parking pass, and I'm damn well gonna park. Calvin shoved the contract back into the glove box, emphasizing park by slamming it shut. You sure are. You're gonna park your ass in solitary. He clicked a button on his belt-mounted radio. Solitary? When did the parking rules get so strict? Calvin was just about done with this nonsense. I'll let site security explain it to you. The attendant pulled his phone out of his pocket and started surfing Reddit. Calvin's right foot made a decision for him, and he knew it was the right one. I need a new car anyway. He pressed the gas pedal to the floor and slammed through the stupid yellow and black bar. He quickly slammed on the brakes, colliding bodily with the steering wheel. The attendant stared at him with wide eyes and dropped his phone to the concrete. Get back here! He ran towards the car, arms waving. My report is gonna bury you, asshole! Calvin sat back in his seat, heart pounding, and flipped the other man the seagull before driving deeper into the garage. 10? 15. 20. 1 month. 1 month? I know. The director escaped. Half the security detail was absent because of the COVID, and... Clef, don't state the obvious, you're too good at it. I'm making your case for you. But even with all that in mind, seeing the Bowie boys still kicking a month from now isn't unrealistic. Bullshit. At the absolute worst, it'll be 29 days before we kick their asses. I think you're splitting hairs, but sure, my money's still on 1 entire month. And I'm going with 20 days. $20 to the winner as usual. Are you good for it? You'll never need to know, Adams. It took 3 proud agents of the insurgency to rout the most unusual and unexpected adversary the FEC had faced at Site-19, the contents of Dr. King's office. By the time they'd finished disposing of all the apple seeds and complaining about how this wasn't what they signed up for, and complaining about how this wasn't a recognizable step on the path to a world which embraced the anomalous, and complaining about how it should have been someone else's, anyone else's job to do what they were doing, they were somewhat less proud. It was a small dent in a big machine, of course, but it wasn't the only one. They take themselves too seriously, thought Dr. Vang. No, that's not quite right. They don't take us seriously enough. The Chaos Insurgency thought that because they controlled Site-19 and the O5s had abandoned it, they could do as they pleased, and everyone would accept it. They were wrong. Sure, maybe the remaining researchers were unlikely to arm themselves, start a rebellion, start yelling war cries. There were enough compulsion memetics seated around the site to control a small army. But not everyone was content to accept the status quo. If you kept your head down, there were plenty of more subtle ways to protest. Happily, some of those ways were also hilarious. Vang had received a gift some years ago from one of his friends, a very diligent researcher who just happened to also be a dog. A robotic arm he could affix to the ceiling of his office, capable of motion in all directions. The fittings had been a real pain in the ass to work out. To take that damn rock out of his presence whenever he needed to get some real work done. He was feeling its mimetic effects more and more each passing day, but everyone thought he was just making excuses to justify his poor hygiene and laziness. Now, though, he'd finally found a use for the thing. He didn't need to understand how it worked, he just needed to keep his door open and extend the arm out into the hallway whenever he heard someone coming. It was a real joy watching them stride past his office and then suddenly stop doing anything. There were 10 insurgent agents standing in front of his door right now, completely bereft of proactive thought. He knew this was probably a one-time gag, but oh, was it ever worth it. Bowie doesn't even show up to these meetings now? John Utoric leaned back in his chair, putting his feet up on the meeting room table. Would you, if you were him? Bumaro picked lint off his robes and glowered at his opposite number. He's probably waiting for us to send white smoke up the chimney signifying an agreement. But we're never going to reach one, are we? Utoric smiled nastily. I mean, why would we? It's not like we even want to find common ground. We only have one thing to discuss. Bumaro paced the room. And it's been a waste of time whenever I've brought it up. I could punch you again, Utoric offered, or we could try approaching the subject from a different angle. Fine. Bumaro stopped pacing. How did you know which cell to look in? You stole the artifact well before we had the containment layout decrypted. Maybe the same way you knew how to find the seventh sun. Utoric looked expectantly at him. Bumaro said nothing, arms folded. I'll bet I know, said Utoric. When you walked into your quarters for the first time, there was a dog-eared note telling you exactly where to find it. Bumaro raised an eyebrow. How did you? Yes, I got one, too. The two men stared at each other for a moment. Bumaro spoke first. Bowie? Setting us against each other for some reason? What reason, though? We're only in this for the sake of convenience. Make a show of force, get him what he wants, get what we want, and get out. And your bizarre offshoot church gets a credibility bump, right? Bumaro shrugged. You have a better explanation? Utoric shrugged back at him. This site's fucking weird. People have been disappearing. Stuff's been going wrong since we settled in. How do we know there isn't someone crawling in the air vents leaving nasty notes to fuck with us? Bumaro scoffed. This isn't Die Hard, John. Air vents are too small for a human being to fit into, and these ones are specifically designed to prevent anyone from crawling through them. I specifically designed these vents, thought Professor Kane Pathos Crow, so I could crawl through them. What the hell is going on? He was going to have to take a long, hard look at his diet if he survived this. Or maybe just redesign the vents again? Of course, it had been a long time since he'd worked at Site 19. He'd only just come back here to check on a few old projects, collect his notes, when the shit had hit the fan. He had no intention of going Metal Gear on the FEC. But he'd gotten quite good at it, nevertheless. He'd practiced scrambling where the insurgents weren't hanging out. The abandoned offices and research labs and empty containment chambers. His claws didn't even click on the metal anymore, and he slithered through the claustrophobic space like a furry metal snake. Leaving the little notes had been a good start, but he was about to up his game. He still couldn't believe his luck. Out of all the anomalies to find, few were simultaneously so portable and so promising. Putting a plastic bag in his mouth so he wouldn't drool on the document, well, that was no fun, but this wasn't a vacation. He was a dog on a mission. Bowie took off the mask. His expression of grim determination faded. His cheeks sagged, he rounded his shoulders, relaxed his buttocks, and exhaled. In the sanctity of his quarters, he dropped the facade and became his blank slate self. Only then did he undo his uniform jacket and the collar of his crisp white shirt. Too many children, he thought. Too many children for too many years. The army, with its resistance to change, the Foundation with its resistance to reality, and now the churches with their resistance to each other. He'd lost track of how many days he'd spent cooped up in here with them. After all those years underground, he had a unique perspective on the passage of time. It definitely moved slower in the presence of other people, though. He was about to remove his tie when he happened to glance at his desk, and saw the thin sheaf of papers blowing in the ventilation breeze. He picked it up. General Bowie. Our tenure at Site 19 has been plagued with incidents of sabotage and long periods of inefficiency. I've been conducting an internal investigation and have come to the following conclusions. Communications Chief Lesage of the Children of Bowie is a Foundation plant. Chief Lesage was responsible for the religious artifacts held at Site 19 coming into the wrong hands, to foment mistrust between our two most vital allies. Chief Lesage intends to halt the project, presumably by destroying the device. I await your instructions. Jeremy Sterak, Chief of Security. He flipped through the remaining 8 pages, nearly out of breath with rage. His hands were shaking. He straightened his tie, buttoned up his shirt and jacket, put on his mask, and stalked out of the room, papers in hand. Site 19 Chief of Security, Jeremy Starek, leaned onto the conference room table with both hands and glowered. Somebody call this meeting. Somebody with clearance. One of the researchers raised a hand tentatively. Starek sighed. This isn't middle school, kid. Talk. If it's not a middle school, don't call me kid, the researcher replied. Maybe there's still a few Foundation loyal soreheads in the site, and they faked up a meeting request? For what reason? Starek looked over the group, about 30 researchers, agents, and sundry personnel. Most of them were either CI like himself or members of one of the 2 churches. To delay our evil plans by half an hour? I did think the email was a little weird, one priest admitted. Do any of you know a researcher named Cal? The door banged open, and a frazzled woman in a lab coat burst in. You all need to get out of here right now! Starek turned his withering glare on her. You're late, Dr. Buck. Buck shook her head fiercely. You don't understand. You're in serious danger. Only of having your presentation hijacked. At the sound of that nasal, confident voice, Starek spun in There was a man in a loose blue dress shirt standing beside him. with frosty tips and a neatly trimmed beard. Sterek's first instinct was to punch the man in the face. He went with his second instinct, which was to shout, "Freeze!" and pull out his sidearm. "Oh God," Buck wheezed. "It's too late." "You folks have power, drive, and ambition," the man declared, waving his arms far too much for the amount of talking he was doing. "But you lost sight of that today. Sitting around in endless meetings. Don't touch that door, please, Dr. Buck. Never getting anything done, but afraid to just leave. I'm serious, Dr. Buck. Step away from that door. In fact, close it behind you." Buck was frozen, her face a mask of fear and frustration. "I look at you all, and what do I see? 4 teams with no sport. 4 committees with no action plan. 4 groups with no interest." He spread his arms wide, like he was about to hug them all at once. "This changes today! The first day of the rest of your insurgency!" Stark pointed his gun at the man, center mass, and pulled the trigger. The bullet glopped into the blue shirt and disappeared. "Been putting in the range time, eh?" The man punched Starak in the shoulder, hard. "I know some exercises which could help that itchy trigger finger." "I've told the general," Buck snapped at Starak. "No large meetings, or you get 4624. I told him." "You're a real go-getter, Dr. Buck," 4624 agreed. "Always with an eye on the main chance, climbing the ladder to success no matter who's holding it up. But you can't do this alone. No traitor is an island." One of the Scarlet Church priests was beginning to wave his hands in the air. 4624 pointed at him with both hands. "This guy's got the right idea. Everybody do the wave. That's one of my favorite warm-up exercises." A thin dart of flame passed through 4624's head and fizzled out. The priest looked embarrassed. "You're all making an effort, but it's just so individually focused. You need to learn to work together." 4624 clapped his hands. "Luckily, that's my area of expertise." Dr. Buck did try the door at that moment, but it was too late. Tendrils of black nothingness seeped between the buttons of 4624's shirt, and the meeting was permanently adjourned. Calvin was on the run, but not really. The parking attendant mustn't have gotten a good description of him. And anyway, everyone seemed to be busy with something. He kept his head down and became one with the lab coat. Calling a meeting had seemed like a good idea, up until he'd seen the priests and insurgents filing into the conference room. He needed to find a place to hide. The ceiling was hissing. Calvin looked up at the cheap white tiles and nearly had a heart attack when one of them shifted out of place. A gray muzzle snout looked down at him. "I said psst. Don't you know what psst means?" Calvin blinked. "You're a dog?" The dog shook his shaggy head. "No, it means he's stupid. Your attention, please. Now, take this." The dog disappeared, then reemerged with a key card in its mouth. Calvin reached out to take it. It was sticky with saliva, and he wiped it off on his jacket. "What's this?" "Communications override. There's a terminal in my office. You seem to be passing beneath notice, so you can probably get there without any problems. Me, not so much. Hey, could you scratch my nose?" Calvin reached up and gingerly ground a fingernail against the dog's snout. "Thanks. I've been in this event a long time now. All right, up to it." "Hop to what? What do you want me to do with the comm override?" "They're monitoring an engagement at Site 37, beaming video feeds and still images back here. I want you to redirect it to our boys and girls in the field." The dog almost seemed to grin. "Especially the stills." Agent Andrea Adams checked the combat suit's systems for the 3rd time, sighing with relief. Fucking finally. "I'll be doing all the hard work. Everyone else is on voyeur duty." "Suits me fine," Clef remarked. "I thought it would," she flexed. "This invalidates our bet, by the way. I wouldn't have put my money on 20 days if I'd known they were going to call you in. Adams smirked. That could almost pass for a compliment. Don't tell anyone. Iris Thompson was reaching in and out of a Polaroid photograph of a Hawaiian beach with one hand. Her fingers were tingling with heat and the anticipation. You getting soft in your old age, Doctor? He raised an eyebrow and winked, and Adams clapped a hand over his mouth. Just imagine he said something disgusting. Director DiMucci, we've got the FEC on the line. Finally, I need to light into them. The Foundation Elimination Coalition had reduced several of DiMucci's sister sites to shells. If High Command was going to do nothing except twiddle their thumbs, he had to take matters into his own hands. He flipped a switch, and that put him on the line. What's the meaning of this? A gruff voice on the other end demanded. It wasn't General Bowie. Probably just an ambassador. Bowie didn't think DiMucci meant business. This would soon change. This is Director John DiMucci. I assume you've received our demands. It's time to give up, or we'll reduce you to rubble. The man on the other end stammered. Are you serious? You know, we're getting pretty tired of you Foundation folk. You act like you own this country. We're aware, replied DiMucci. He had his men on standby, each one armed with enough lead to fill Bowie's skull. Your reign of terror is over. You know what? I'm done. I'm done with this. First you put Dr. Bright in the presidency. All right, fine. But then you put Trump in the seat and cause a media balloon so big it has my men working overtime to compensate. And you don't even get me started on what you did with Clinton. The FBI's gonna hear about this. Let's see how long your welcome lasts after that. Sorry? Who is this again? This is James Traynor, chairman of the FEC. Say goodbye to your job. After the beep, DiMucci was quiet for a moment. He let the consequences of what he had just done sink in. After accepting the inevitable fact of his demotion, he opened the line to his secretary. When I said FEC, I meant the one that's attacking our sites, not the Federal Elections Commission. Oh, really? I just assumed it was some kind of political metaphor. The security detail struggled to keep up with Bowie. He was walking down the hallway, taking long, sharp strides, a walking manifestation of fury. Where's the chief? AWOL, sir. Bowie nodded. Lazange knew Starrick was onto him, damn it. He slammed open the doors to the central command center, and the detail fanned out to block the exits. Several pairs of eyes watched him stride into the center of the room. 17 mouths gaped as he drew his firearm and fired. 16 pairs of wide eyes watched him lower the smoking pistol and spit. Somebody clean this up. He slapped the sheets down on an unattended console and left the room. 2 agents took hold of Lasange's corpse and began to drag it away. A 3rd agent picked up the papers Bowie had left behind. Agent Lungu, I have compiled a comprehensive report on the actions of your partner, Agent Duane Malloy. For the past 3 years, he has been slandering you to your superiors, swapping your service weapon with an inferior model prone to jamming in the field, sabotaging your interpersonal relationships, and stealing your lunch from the company refrigerator. Please examine the evidence in full and reach your own conclusions. Janice Malloy, FEC, formerly SCPF, Internal Affairs. Of course. Agent Oana Lagu clenched the sheets tightly in her fist. 30 men and women in uniforms, robes, and lab coats sat in a loose circle of chairs. The loose circle of chairs sat in a seemingly endless field of daisies. There was birdsong in the air, and there was also grumbling. All right, Anita, it's your turn! 4624 was standing in the center of the circle, beaming encouragingly at all of them. He gestured at the Scarlet Church priestess like he was presenting her as the prize at a game show. What's your favorite color? She glared at him. Red. They were sneakers from the rest of the circle, from those participants who didn't already have their heads in their hands. Red! 4624 chuckled as a bullet passed through his head. And what do we know about red, ladies and gentlemen?
It's what should have come out of you just now,
Sterrick growled.
It's what I've been saying since I got up this morning,
offered a second insurgent.
It represents motivation, but also hostility,
said one of the lab coats. The rest of the circle turned to stare at her. She looked up from her notepad and blinked.
What? I'm the only one who's been paying attention?
4624 was grinning ear to ear. Fantastic work, Olive! He turned back to the priestess. Now, which of the following words would you say best describes you? Eager, committed, respected, embedded.
How fucking long is this going to take?
Sterrick snapped. Well, once we've got the personality tests complete, we've got a 3-day seminar retreat planned. 4624 looked thrilled. We're going to get to know each other so well. Almost as one, the group stood up from their chairs. Stephanie Buck uncrossed her arms and leaned forwards. Wait, don't, you can't.
Fuck this noise,
Sterrick shouted.
We've indulged this asshole for long enough.
He started marching and waved for the rest of them to follow him.
I'm gonna crest that ridge and see if this place is real or not.
You can't leave, Buck stood up. He won't. 4624's smile was predatory now. Are you attempting to assert your authority, Captain Sterrick? We haven't even done the respect-building exercises yet. His blue shirt was rippling now, and there was no breeze. I don't like your chances, honestly.
Stuff it, you anomalous shit!
Sterrick continued marching, right up until the black tendrils settled around his throat and began rhythmically throttling him. Don't run! Buck screamed as the rest of the group began to run. You were always so practical, Stephane! 4624 remarked, as it strangled 31 insurgents, priests, and traitors into unconsciousness. And in your business, that's saying something. Occasionally, he asked himself why he wasn't writing real scripts. The first time Dr. Edison had been surprised by how much he'd enjoyed it, imagining all those scenes, writing them down, and seeing the end result turn out just the way he wanted. It was a rare moment in his career at the Foundation where he was truly loving every minute. Sure, he'd spent 4 years in Antarctica to avoid the wrath of his offended colleagues, but he'd never regretted his little film or its sequels. He'd done good work, and found his passion besides. They'd finally let him come back to 19. He'd dreamt up so many more scenes, and now, completely forgotten in his office in the middle of possibly the worst crisis the Foundation had ever seen, he was writing them all down. Picking a shitty director to turn his work into something unintentionally hilarious, picking producers who would be dumb enough to want to make a movie about this very real disaster, with appropriate redactions, of course, and penning the most recent trite, cliched script possible. His ideas weren't as crazy as what was actually happening out there, after all. He wove that stuff in too, just enough to add some spice. He wondered if anyone would be able to tell the difference between what had really happened and what hadn't. Maybe he could even work this into the disinformation campaign they had needed to drum up to cover the chaos of losing the site. And if it made the CI look even more ridiculous than they actually were, well, something good might actually come from all this stupidity. This time, without a review from any relevant guys with glasses, thank God. It was like a bad dream. The kind you might tell your therapist about. The kind you'd be terrified to tell your therapist about. The woman with the bronze bracelets drawing back an ethereal bowstring on an ethereal bow, firing the bones of her arm through the flesh of her fingers in an explosion of high-speed gore, and fainting even as she shrieked in agony. The MTF commander stepping on a landmine, which was actually just a patch of red carpet which sprang to life, covering him completely and draining him of his blood. The man running backwards from the Boist lines, wearing a pair of black sunglasses which somehow caused the Foundation support vehicles arrayed behind him to explode, one after the other. Site 19 was empty, and all the anomalies were here. A Chaos Insurgency soldier discharged an entire rifle's worth of ammunition into her suit, which deflected every bullet harmlessly, not least because the bullets were actually human teeth. His eyes went wide when the magazine ran out and Adams took it from him. His eyes rolled back in his head when she clubbed him over the head with it.
"This is ridiculous," she said. "Half of these anomalies are hell on wheels and the other half don't do shit."
Bo is throwing everything at Site 37 and seeing what sticks,
Clef remarked in her ears. He yawned.
"Close comms next time instead of yawning in my head."
She leapt over a troop transport and unloaded on the de-embarking soldiers.
"Don't suppose anyone's taken any photographs?"
Iris Thompson's bored voice replaced Clef's.
"It's early days,"
Adams replied, dodging a stream of acid fired at her from a blue and green water gun. The ground behind her burned as she punched the wielder in the face. She caught the gun and briefly considered turning it on the man before stowing it in her pack.
"It might be late days now," said Clef. "We're getting reports of a supertank and 20 gerryanders approaching from the north, and that's more than even you can handle."
"I'm not alone here, Clef,"
Adams shouted. 3 women with strange symbols carved in their hip-length hair were strangling a squad of MTF soldiers with said hair, and she put a slug between each of their eyes.
"Might as well be. Withdraw, Adams. That suit's too valuable to lose, to say nothing of its contents."
"I didn't know you cared."
She spotted the man leading the Boist charge, a bog-standard infantryman wearing a age-pitted bronze helmet.
"Fuck! They're getting tactical advice from an ancient Roman ghost. No wonder what they're doing doesn't make any goddamn sense." "Dr. Clef, we've got a transmission from Site 19.
"Bowie?"
"No, sir. It came in from researcher Calvin's authorization code. It looks like still frames from a security feed inside a tank."
Clef turned to look at Iris, suddenly sitting upright in her chair.
"Still frames, you say?"
"I'm freed! I have cast down the gates of dis and taken the battlefield once more!"
Adams leveled an arm cannon at the man with the helmet.
"I'm going to send you back to Pluto, asshole."
The Legionnaire sighed.
Pluto's not a place, he's a...
The roar of the gerryanders drowned him out. 20 mechanical monstrosities, human beings fused into an amalgamation of machinery and flesh, stomped across the field towards him.
"Cut the banter, and cut!"
Clef shouted. Adams fired, incinerating the soldier. The helmet clanked to the ground, sizzling but unharmed. She pointed both arms at the gerryanders.
"I got this." "No."
Iris Thompson's voice rang in her ears.
"I got this."
Adams watched in astonishment as the massive tank rolled into view, just offside the rank of gerryanders, and swerved abruptly into their path. It began firing its main gun as it collided with them, and she felt the explosions in the ground beneath her feet. There were 10 gerryanders left when the tank finally exploded. Flanked by dozens of church and insurgency soldiers, Adams pointed her cannons at them, and was about to open fire when a thrashing tentacle beast descended from the sky on a pillar of flame.
"Loathsome antipodal grace bemoans the solid sanctions of the rancid metal breath of suns extinguished in ignorance and primal awe."
The massive bovine heart and its swooping white-clad rider crashed through the first gerryander like a miniature meteorite. They burst out of the smoking biomechanical wreckage, and the heart's feelers began strangling and slicing at the horrified retreating soldiers.
"Mind your limbs, ladies and gentle ladies," Moon Champion shouted. "This puppy's not completely housebroken."
20 days might be generous, Clef mused. And that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for coming, ladies and gentlemen. I've got to rush to edit this because recording stuff, I had to swap to an entirely new recording program for this because the last one died. Yes. This is a fun one, though. I do enjoy this story. We've got everything. We got all the new stuff. We got all the old stuff. It's amazing. Okay, but thank you very much for coming, and good luck next time, and see you then.